Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's Global COVID-19 Show. Today is episode number 270. We're talking about anti-Asian hate in America. And we have two wonderful guests who will join us, who will help us understand what is happening in the community and what has brought us here and where we go from here. We'll be joined by Jo-Ann Yoo, who is the executive director of the Asian-American Foundation, a really important organization that does so much important work in the Asian-American community, and by Paula Yoo, who's the author of From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry, The Killing of Vincent Chin and the Trial that Galvanized the Asian-American Movement. So you'll meet them in just a moment. Hi, everyone. I'm Sree. Thank you so much for being here. We truly appreciate your time. We do this show once a week or so to understand various aspects of the pandemic. We've been doing it for more than a year now. We did it every day, and then we went to this weekly format. We're so grateful to all our guests and our friends who've been watching around the world. We've had more than 1 million viewers, more than 500 guests. We've had speakers from 73 cities and 20 countries. We are archived on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/SreeNet, and we're in partnership with Scroll Global and Scroll.in. We're very grateful to our producers, Rose Horowitz and Vandana Menon, who are part of Digimentors, the company that I co-founded. And what we do at Digimentors is put together talk shows like this, as well as run summits, webinars, conferences, virtual events, hybrid events. So if you would like to talk to us about any of these, please get in touch. Digimentors.group is the URL, and we'd love to hear from you. We are live right now on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. Please share with your friends and family, and please tag someone who would benefit from this conversation. They can watch live or later. So let's meet our guest. Paula Yoo is the author of a major book on the killing of Vincent Chin, and Jo-Ann Yoo is the executive director of the Asian-American Foundation. A big welcome to both of you. Hello, folks. How are you?
Fine. How are you? Good to see you.
Doing well. Hello.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. My first question on these shows is always, how are you? Where are you? And how are your families handling the pandemic? So let's go to Jo-Ann first.
Sure. I could always be better. Sree, it's so good to see you because you're an old friend of the Federation. So it's really great to be on this platform with you. This is a new platform, and yet it's yet another one that I'm learning now. And this is kind of exciting for me. I am in New York City, in Brooklyn, and my family, everybody's doing well. My parents are a little freaked out about all the hate incidents and what is happening. They live far, far away in another state, other side of the coast. So those are the answers.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that the family's okay, but we are, of course, talking about all this pain that the community is suffering from, and we will talk about that in just a moment. Paula, over to you.
Hi, I'm over in Los Angeles. It's still sunny outside and very warm. And we are, thank you for asking. I'm fine, I'm healthy. So is my husband. And so are our 3 cats, of whom I hope do not interrupt this. I tried to shut the door. And both our moms and our families, everyone thankfully is safe and healthy. My husband is a public school teacher, so he's been teaching remotely. And I do have to admit, as surreal as this year has been, it's been kind of sweet to hear these little 12-year-old voices kind of floating down the hallway as I write. And because I write from home, I socially distanced before it became a thing. So for me, my life is pretty much still the same, but it is on a more serious note. Of course, it's really devastating what has happened. And because my husband and I are lucky and privileged and fortunate enough to work from home. We have taken lockdown extremely seriously. We just refuse to leave the house. We won't do social. We won't do anything. We've even done the whole contactless pickup of groceries. We have not eaten takeout, delivery, or at a restaurant since March 2020 because we want to help essential workers. So instead what we do is we donate money to restaurant service industry charities and organizations to try to help restaurants in that way, since we are not ordering food. And we're just taking it very seriously because unlike a lot of people, we don't have children and we can afford to work from home. So we figure it's our duty to try to help and flatten the curve as much as we can. So we're getting by. So thank you.
Wow, we've talked to lots of folks. I think you're the first family that has not even done takeout in this time. So that's really taking this seriously. And kudos to your husband, and thank you to all public school teachers because they're really thankless jobs that they do, and especially during this pandemic. Well, I did want to show people your T-shirt, if that's okay, and I want Jo-Ann to see it too.
Yeah, I am wearing this shirt. I also have another shirt. This shirt is Asian Heroes Matter, and I have another shirt. I should have brought it over to hold it up. It's called Black Heroes Matter, and to support independent Black businesses, this one, and they have many other hero shirts as well for all different diverse communities. They're known as Black Heroes Matter, and I have to show you something fun. If I can grab it.
You can tell she's a storyteller, Jo-Ann, right?
So I also, just to promote another independent Black-owned business, I bought these buttons, and I'll show.
We'll show that in a close-up so people can see it.
Can you see it? Wash your hands and don't be a racist. And these came out from Inclusive Randomness. It's a lovely young woman who runs a button business, and so she's got a lot of fun, cool buttons of different colors and stuff. So that's just part of my solidarity that I'm doing. So very proud to show this shirt, and thank you, Black Heroes Matter.
Yes, that is just great to hear. So let's talk about this incredibly painful weeks we've gone through, and basically this year. But before we do that, I want folks to understand the work of the Federation, which is such a crucial part of not just the Asian American community, but the American community. So let's hear from Jo-Ann the story of the Federation and what it does.
Sure. So we are a leadership convener organization for about 70 member and partner organizations that serve the Asian American community in New York City. As you know, Asian American community is the fastest growing population. We're about 16%. But despite the model minority myth, we are some of the poorest New Yorkers, Asian American. We are 1 in 4 lives in poverty. 70% of us are immigrants. 95% of our kids have at least one immigrant parent, and we have the fastest growing senior population. But they're some of they're the poorest senior population, and we have about 50% limited English proficiency rate. So, despite our what people may think of the Asian American communities, I think there's a lot that we need to unpack, and that means that there's a lot of work for all of us to do together.
Well, I'm so grateful to the Federation for the work it does. Tell us where we can learn more and how people can get involved.
Sure, definitely our website, aafederation.org. We are in transition and uploading new cool graphics and photos, but all the information is there. We are also we produce a lot of the research about Asian American communities in New York City, and all of those reports that we produce, they're in our website, so you can certainly download it. And everything we have is free. I think we might sometimes ask you to submit your email address so that way we can track how many people are looking at our things. But the reports, the safety guides that we created during the pandemic, they're all free for the taking. So we hope that people will use those resources.
Thank you. And let's put some perspective onto what's been happening in terms of Asian American hate in this country. More than 3,800 incidents were reported, and those are just the reported ones. So we know how much difficulty the Asian American community has gone through, and there are various reasons for this, of course. But I think with the pandemic, it's clear that it's because of the association that the president and others made of China and the virus. And I think nothing was more emblematic of the problem than the way in which Donald Trump repeatedly, every opportunity he had a chance to say coronavirus, he would say, the China virus or the Wuhan virus, things like that, really racist things like Kung flu, and all of that came together in a photograph of his speaking notes where it said coronavirus, and he had hand crossed it out and written in China before the word virus. And so, Jo-Ann, from your perspective, what has this year been like for the community, and what should we know about it?
Sure. It's been a really rough year. I think that's probably the understatement of this year. But we saw the challenges starting in January of last year because, and where we saw it first was the small businesses. People were not coming to the small businesses. They were not coming to our enclaves. Nobody was, patronizing the restaurants. And so by Lunar New Year, I think a lot of folks were deciding to close because they could not afford the overhead. And they decided, if we're not getting any customers, we should just close and not incur expenses. So that's when we knew. And then we started to hear, the verbal harassment, and then it escalated. And so, Professor Jung has said, I think 3,800. In New York, it's about 800 hate incidents that have been reported, but we know that number is really low for multiple reasons. The attacks seem to be escalating. It's been very scary, and I think it is our deepest nightmare of what the attacks could be happened in Atlanta last Tuesday, and I think we're all just reeling from it, and we're really processing that. And the perspective is, I've seen this happen in the Pan-Asian community. We've seen it after 9/11 to the South Asian Muslim Arab community, and then with the Muslim ban and just the targeting. So for the Pan-Asian community, we've seen this in multiple ways showing up in our community and how it's targeted us. So the East Asian community, people are really afraid. People are afraid to go outside. People are afraid to, I think the saddest part of all of this is that we all have to be afraid. We all have to take a lot of precautions. And for me, the saddest part of all of this is that I need to be suspicious of my fellow New Yorkers. And, when I'm walking down the street and I hear somebody walking behind me, I've been telling people I step out into the street and let them pass me because it feels really uncomfortable to have somebody walking behind. I am constantly aware of who's around me. Sometimes I have stopped going on walks because I don't know who's out there, right? And people have said things, even in my neighborhood, and it's been really tough. And I say that exactly what Paula has said. I say that with all of the privilege that I have, and I think that's what makes me angry and makes me want to fight harder, because I know that there are people who don't even speak the language. The elders who've been attacked, immigrant workers, vulnerable immigrants, undocumented immigrants, how scary it must be for them that they have to go to work during a global pandemic, and the fact that they now have to be concerned about their personal safety, and having to worry about, am I bringing COVID home to infect my family? I think there's so many levels that we're having to deal with. So it's been beyond exhausting and really sad.
Yeah, that is so sad. Folks, we're going to talk to Paula Yoo in just a second, who's going to tell us about some of the history here, including the story of Vincent Chin, which I think not enough Americans know that story. But first, let's just say hello to some of our viewers watching from around the world. Apollo is watching from Montclair, New Jersey. Steve Taylor's in Philadelphia. Rahajan's watching from Long Island. Paula's watching from Tallahassee, Florida. And Jonathan's watching from the East Village. He's watched all 270 episodes of this show. No one has come even close to that. We're just so grateful to Jonathan for his energy and time, and he's also joined me as a guest and as a speaker as well. So thank you very much. And Jonathan says he loved the button that Paula showed earlier. Pradnya is watching from Silver Spring. Reena Nainan, the great television journalist who many of you know, is saying I always have great guests, and so we do tonight as well. Stefan says, joining from Ramsey, New Jersey, we must get this to stop. I'm always so concerned for my Asian and South Asian friends. Tim is watching from Northeast Pennsylvania. And Kati Joshi, former guest speaker on this show, says Federation has been a resource for our Asian American communities for so long. Thank you. So that's a shout out to Jo-Ann and her incredible team at the Federation. And Rajan is tagging folks, and you can do the same. People can join us now or later. And Prabodh says hello from New York City. So let's talk about the galvanizing of the Asian American movement and the community with the story of Vincent Chin. And Paula Yoo has written a book that's coming out next month, so you can pre-order it on Amazon, and it's about the story of Vincent. So can you tell us more, please?
Of course, thank you. And I do want to say with Jo-Ann, I too am a little emotionally and mentally exhausted. I did want to add the other reason why I haven't left the house since March 2020, aside from essential doctor and dentist visits, is because I too am scared. I started seeing the writing on the wall as early as February when family members reported to me, hey, I was on a plane and this person didn't want to sit next to me because they were scared of the coronavirus. And that's when the first red flag came up for me. I was like, uh-oh, this is not good. So, and I write in my book a little bit about being racially profiled during the pandemic as well. There's an afterword in my book linking the story of Vincent Chin to what's happening today and how relevant it is. And I'll just hold up my book real quick. This is the arc right here. So
from a whisper to a rallying cry, the killing of Vincent Chin and the trial that galvanized the Asian American movement. And it's coming out in a few weeks, but people can pre-order it on Amazon and elsewhere.
Yeah. Yes, it's coming from Norton Young Readers, which is the children's and young adult imprint of W.W. Norton and Company. And I'll go a little bit into that as well, why this is a young adult book for high school students, but it's actually written for everyone because I used to be a reporter. I'm another Columbia University J-School grad alumni. So I wrote this like I would for anyone. So there's no simplifying. It's a very, I hit everything in the case pretty hard on, and I have some exclusive sources and a little bit of new information too about the case since it's almost 40 years old. Starting next year will be the 40th anniversary. So just to take a step back, I just want to bring you to Detroit in 1982. Vincent Chin was 27 years old, millennial aged, and he and his three best friends were going out to the Fancy Pants Club, which was the Fancy Pants Club was an adult entertainment club. It was his bachelor party. He was going to get married the next week. So he went out with his friends, and that is when he met Ronald Ebens, who at the time was a foreman for Chrysler, and Ronald Ebens' son, Michael Nitz, who was a recently laid off auto worker. And they all were there, and it's very much a case of he said. Some witnesses testified that they heard certain racist slurs being said out loud. One of the professional dancers at the club testified at both trials that she overheard Ebens allegedly say, and I don't know about language here, so I won't say the exact, the words are printed in my book. I don't censor the words, but he said, it's because of you little mother F ... that we're out of work. And so what happened was they got into a fight, got kicked out of the club. Ronald Ebens pulled a baseball bat out from the back of his car, chased Vincent down the street, but then he couldn't keep up with him. They got in the car, and this is where it becomes a he said thing. But long story short, they coincidentally found Vincent way down outside a McDonald's about half a mile down from the club, and they got out and they beat him to death with a baseball bat. He was beaten to a coma, and he was in a coma for 4 days. And this was June 19th, 1982, and he died. They had to take him off life support, and he died on June 23rd. And then on June 29th, which was one day after their wedding was supposed to happen, all the wedding guests ended up going to the funeral on June 29th, one day after the wedding. And what happened after that was in March 1983, Judge Charles Kaufman, they had a hearing, and they plea bargained down to manslaughter. Both men pled guilty to manslaughter. And even to the defendant's surprise, Judge Kaufman took mercy on them, and he said, listen, you got to have the famous quote is, you have to have the punishment fit the criminal, not the crime. These guys have good jobs, stable background. There's no way they're going to do this again. This was a terrible case of toxic masculinity and too much alcohol, and this will not happen again with them. So I'm going to give them $3,000 plus court costs each as a fine and 3 years probation. And then that's what galvanized the Asian American movement. Up until that point in 1983, Asian Americans, we often identified as, I'm Korean American, I'm Chinese American, I'm Japanese American, my family is from this country. And Asian American, the term, is a political term, and it did exist. It actually was coined in the late 1960s, 1968, by two students who started an organization at their school. And the term Asian American as a political term, as a unifying term, was very famous among college student activists. Yes, did I hear my name?
No, please go ahead.
I thought for a sec someone Joan wanted to add something, because she's obviously the expert on the activism part. But anyway, long story short, the term became mainstream to all Asian Americans across the country. Suddenly everyone was like, okay, we're all together. So the Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Filipino, Indian, and then churches, synagogues, Black businesses, Latino community leaders, they all got together to protest this. And it was mostly led by Asian American activists, including some of the people I interviewed for the book, including the famous Helen Zia, and Roland Huang and James Shimura were among the ones that started a group called American Citizens for Justice, which still exists today. They do a lot of community and advocacy outreach. And so basically, this protest led to national protests across the country, where people from LA, Chicago, everybody, nobody had ever seen so many Asian Americans protesting. I mean, we protested with the Black Panthers. We've done protests in other solidarity movements, but this was the first time that there were nationwide protests with majority Asian Americans carrying picket signs saying justice for Vincent Chin. And that led to a federal indictment in November of 1983, which then led to the first federal civil rights trial for an Asian American, in which Ronald Ebens and Michael Nitz were both indicted on 2 counts of conspiracy. And the second was violating Vincent Chin's civil right to enjoy and attend a place of public accommodation, that being the Fancy Pants Club. So in 1984, the trial happened under Judge Anna Diggs Taylor. The jury voted the jury decided that Michael Nitz was not guilty on both counts, and they ruled that Ronald Ebens was guilty on 1 count, violating Vincent Chin's civil right to be in a place of public accommodation. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, but due to allegations of alleged witness coaching, there were some tapes that were not allowed to be played in the first trial, and the defense said we need to have another trial. The U.S. Sixth Court of Appeals reviewed the case, and in 1986 said, yeah, those tapes of the witnesses being interviewed, that could have been coaching. You should have played them in the first trial. Let's have another trial. So in 1987, same trial happened, and this time they got to hear the tapes. And to this day, all the witnesses, a couple of them I interviewed, and I also interviewed the lawyer, Lisa Chan, who interviewed and tape recorded their conversation. I've talked to many people directly involved in this. They, to this day, deny that they were coached. But unfortunately, it was just enough to open the door. So the guilty verdict was reversed, and Ronald Ebens was found not guilty. So to this day, on the record, Ronald Ebens was found not guilty of violating Vincent Chin's civil right to be in a place of accommodation due to the color of his skin, due to his race. But even though at the end it happened that way, there wasn't your Hollywood happy ending. Vincent Chin became a symbol for the Asian American movement and for people realizing, wait, Asian Americans are not white. We experience not just racist microaggressions like, oh, your English is really good, or you don't speak with an accent, or where are you from? We too. I mean, the Chinatowns have been purged. We have massacres. We have the Chinese laborers were treated unfairly and not even given credit for helping build the railroads. So we have a long history that nobody knows about because a lot of it has been erased from our schools because we're two sentences in a social studies book in the 10th grade. So that's why his name became very famous. And then unfortunately throughout the years, because this was almost 40 years old, his name kind of disappeared. And it was interesting because his name actually came back before the pandemic. In 2017, when the 3 Indian American men were shot at and 2 of them were killed. It's so sad. It breaks my heart with that story. And the killer was then sent to jail. And he literally said, go back to your country. It was a hate crime. The Indian community, they rallied and they realized there was an article that was written, it was on NPR, where they said, is this our Indian Vincent Chin? And his name came back. And his name came back as well because after the presidential election in 2016, anti-Asian hate crimes and incidents started to rise. In fact, they tripled in Michigan alone. By 2017, and it was because of Trump using certain terms, and then it just snowballed with the pandemic. And I'll stop. I'm sorry, I tend to ramble. I hope that made sense, but that's it in a nutshell. So
well, thank you for sharing that history. So important for all of us to know it, and I encourage everybody to get Paula's book when it comes out next month. It's going to be so important for us to know this history. Jo-Ann, just want to hear your reflection on what you just heard. You, of course, know the story. You, of course, have done so much work in the community, but would like to just hear that history. And then I want to talk about what happened in Atlanta last week.
I love the story of Vincent Chin because it's a reminder of how far we come, but how far we still have to go. And I have to give a shout out to the mayor of Manhattan, Kansas, Usha Reddy. Her son works for me. But being the Indian, the South Asian mayor, she had to help the families of the 2 men who were killed in Kansas, and it was so shocking. I love the fact that our community is waking up to what we need to start to do. I think, the one thing about Vincent Chin that always sticks out for me is the fact that it was a very local issue until Jesse Jackson as he was running for president, brought the entire national media with him to shine a light on what was happening. And so I think when a lot of people are nitpicking about, where is this a Black Asian, what is happening now is a Black Asian thing, it's an important reminder of how much the Black community has actually contributed to helping our own civil rights struggle and to be able to create this social justice movement for our community. So I know that recently Reverend Jackson did write an op-ed and just telling his story, and that was really, really touching. So, that's a really powerful example of what we can do together as communities who are that when we face tragedy, that we need to stick together and to be able to help each other.
I can't hear. I'm sorry, Sree, I can't hear you.
Sorry, Rahajan put in a link to the Federation website and also says that I look forward to reading the book, and he has it on his wish list. Wayne Kamadoy from the New York Times is writing in, says, I am a Japanese American and lived 90 miles north of Detroit at that time. I was in high school. It was a frightening event to happen, especially when many of my small town were laid off from an auto plant or a plant affiliated with the Big Three, a real miscarriage of justice for the Chin family. Vincent's tragedy should not have been forgotten for all of these years. And thank you, Wayne, for sharing your thoughts. This is something that we obviously all want to pay attention to And here is a comment saying, appreciate this conversation. Thank you. And Rajan is also putting in links to a Federation on Twitter and at Paula Yoo on Twitter. And Professor Joshi says, we need to know more of these moments. Now, here's a question that has come in about Atlanta. And the question from Joe is, do you feel that it's a disservice to label the Georgia shooting as a hate crime? It appears it was clearly a very deranged man who did this heinous act because of mental illness. How do you answer that question? We'll go to Paula first and then to Jo-Ann.
Oh, of course. I did want. Oh, there's a little echo. Can you hear the echo? Mm-hmm. Okay, the echo's gone. You can still hear me? Okay, great. I did want to add too, I actually forgot to mention with the other comment earlier about the Japanese cars, the other reason too why Vincent Chin became such a clarion call about Asian American civil rights was because it happened in 1982 when the Japanese import cars were starting to outstrip the big three, GM, Chrysler, and Ford. There were hundreds of thousands of layoffs happening. So in the news, you would see white auto workers in Michigan, or basically non-Asian auto workers, beating with a sledgehammer the Toyotas and the Datsuns and everything, and calling them Jap cars. And even politicians. There's a famous politician who's quoted in my book who called Honda, quote unquote, the little yellow people. So a lot of that xenophobia and racism, it was happening at that time. Anti-Asian sentiment had increased in Michigan. So that's why I just wanted to remind people, that's why his name is also so huge right now with the pandemic, because we're seeing the same exact pattern happen. And now that I've said that, we're talking about Atlanta. Here, I do want to say too, mental health care and mental illness, very serious, an area that we also need a lot more improvement in. We need to erase the stigma of all of that and the stereotypes. So I'm very much behind increasing awareness of neurodiversity. So I did want to say that. Secondly, I wanted to say, as an Asian American woman, and I think I speak for all of us, it is impossible to be sexist and or misogynist against me or an Asian American or Pacific Islander woman in this country without having that sexism or misogyny rooted in racism. And that's why it's hard for people who aren't Asian. They think, oh, it was misogyny or he hated women. And it's like, yeah, that's true. You can be misogynist, you can be sexist, but we have the stereotypes, the Asian fetish, the horrible terms like yellow fever, and you know, and I'm sure Jo-Ann can talk more about that as well with her activism work and scholarship, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. So the minute I heard it was a spa, and then also even the fact that spas, some of them were wrongfully, inaccurately called massage parlors, which then brings up all the, you know, Full Metal Jacket and all the stereotypes. And so yeah, I knew right away. I was like, and I knew also there would be a debate about it. I knew some people would say, oh, it's misogyny, and it's no, not with us. It can never just be that. So that's what I wanted to say about that. And also it does break my heart. I've had about 4 hours of sleep since last week because this is just terrible. It's my heart goes out to the families.
Thank you, Jo-Ann.
Absolutely. I think every Asian woman is, you know, I check in with I've been checking in with every Asian woman I know, every Asian American I know, but especially the women, because I think we feel it very, very deeply. You know, journalists, activists, you know, all of my range of friends, you know, I ask them, are you okay? Are you holding space for yourself to be able to grieve and be angry? We've been saying that this was going to happen. This is the nightmare that we all wanted to avoid. And the hate crimes part is a really interesting comment because there's a lot of different discussions, but you know, when the sheriff went on, right after the killing, when the sheriff went on television and said, the kid said he had a bad day. I don't think that you get to go kill 8 people and have the privilege of naming your own intent. You don't get to call your crime. You don't get to label your crime. And I know that there's a lot of conversations around hate crimes, but he bought a gun in that afternoon, and he basically drove to 3 different Asian-owned Asian spas and killed 6 people. And there's a witness that said he's gonna, wanted to kill more Asians. And so for me, I think it is definitely premature for anybody to be saying, oh, it's not a hate crime. A killer doesn't get to name his crime. And he doesn't get to say he had a bad day, so he killed people. That's what he did. I have bad day and I don't kill people. Most, everybody, we have bad days and we stay home and have a glass of wine and go to bed early. We don't go out and buy a gun and shoot down 8 people. But it is incredibly insulting and infuriating to the Asian American community to say, even though he went to, 3 Asian spas and, found those women because he knew them, he had been to those places before, to say, oh, it's not a hate crime is incredibly insulting.
I don't think there's any other way to describe it but a hate crime. And you can, in fact, have, be sexist, misogynistic, and racist at the same time, as we have seen as well. My friend Arun Venugopal had a really important tweet right at the beginning of this. With almost all these incidents, the question is asked, is this a hate crime? Is this anti-Asian? And he said that's the wrong question to ask. Whatever the intent of that particular incident, we're contributing, or this incident is contributing to the terrorism that's being felt by the community. And that should be what we should look at. It's terrorizing the community. Each one of these all adds up, and we are all seeing that happen. I can just say, as a South Asian, I have been insulated from this past year many of the issues around the virus because it's associated with East Asians, and just like the anti-South Asian, anti-Muslim, anti-Arab sentiment after 9/11, where it was people who look like me who would be given the extra scrutiny and the hate crimes and the shootings that happened. So we see this as all Asian Americans together. What needs to be done in this country? The racism and the hate crimes are certainly part of the story here. We're going to start wrapping up here, but I would love to hear from Paula. Just looking ahead, and from Jo-Ann, let's look ahead. Where do we go as a community and as a country? What are your prescriptions for improving the situation that we're dealing with?
Well, I want to say, first of all, just going back very quickly to what Jo-Ann was saying, yes, it is insulting, the bad day comment. And I also feel it's insulting to mental health advocates as well, and neurodiverse people, because it is very rare for someone dealing with a mental illness or mental health issue to do something that the statistics are out there. So once again, it's always trying to shift the blame, and that also gets me very angry. And I felt a bunch of my friends and I have all expressed, we feel like Cassandra. We have been warning everybody, just like what Jo-Ann said. We've been warning everybody. No one's listening to us. And then our Trojan horse attacks in Atlanta, and it just, the trauma that we're all feeling, the collective trauma is just, it's overwhelming. And I think in terms of, to answer your question about the future, I want to address why my book is a young adult book. I actually thought, well, I'll write it as a nonfiction narrative adult book, kind of like In Cold Blood, or just, all those famous books. And when I wrote it, my book agent, and she said to me, this is a young adult, because I write young adult and children's books as well. And she said, I think the way we stop this is through education. If these kids had read this book, maybe we wouldn't have the statistic today of 1 out of 4 Asian American and Pacific Islander teenagers have reported being bullied because of the coronavirus, directly because of China virus. And, had this book had all the historical events that we've talked about in Asian American history and our contributions been explored in depth in our high schools, in our elementary schools, maybe this would not be happening. People would be more educated. So even though my book is written for everybody, I'm especially hopeful that it strikes a chord with high school teachers and librarians and high school students, because I think this is how we stop it, is through education and empathy, and also, of course, dismantling the systemic racist government and trying to get more equity. And now I sound like a hipster, sorry. Learning out all the woke phrases. But bottom line, it's education. We've got to start early, because representation really does matter in pop culture, media, TV, movies, and books. So that is why I write my books about Asian American historical figures in history, because it's my way of fight. We talk about fighting back. I'm writing back.
You're writing back, and that's just such a powerful thing, and you're able to do that now. So that's really special that you're doing that. The book is called From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry: The Killing of Vincent Chin and the Trial That Galvanized the Asian American Movement. And I see that our friend Rajan is gifting a copy of the book to his cousin's daughter, who is now 17. And this issue of not teaching Asian American success stories, history, leaders, pioneers in the American schooling system is just so unacceptable. And I hope more can be done around that. Let's go to Jo-Ann, who's the executive director of the Asian American Federation.
So for a year, I've been sitting in my home office, my makeshift home office, thinking about, how do we get through this pandemic? And now it's the pandemic of racism. I think this is a really critical moment for our country. We need to have some really honest conversations about racism, about how we look at each other. How do we marginalize, continue, the marginalization of each community. We look at all of the deaths and, who's really suffered. It's communities of color, and we don't acknowledge that. And I think one of the things that, and oftentimes I said, oh my gosh, you are such a Pollyanna, right? But I think we do need to be mindful of, trying to build community, not just by ourselves, but by building it with other people, and wishing for each other and seeing in each other the best reflection of ourselves in each other, meaning other communities. I don't like the questions when people ask me, so what do you think we should be doing? And, what should the Asian American community be doing? And I find that a really tough question, because I feel like you're asking the victims, what the solution is. I think those questions belong to the legislators who hold all the cards, who hold all the power. And so we need to ask them, what do you plan to do about what is happening to the Asian American community? And I want to remind all of us that elected officials, there are employees, we hire them. They're going to work for us, and we need to be able to hold them accountable. We need to start to look at how racism has really impacted not just communities of color, but everybody, and how we've failed to understand each other. The Asian American community, we are plagued by the model minority myth. We are the perpetual foreigners. Those two racist tropes are used against us and used against other communities to marginalize them. And I think it's high time that we not get flattered by things like that, and to be able to push back to say, yes, some Asian Americans are successful, but there are plenty who aren't, and there are poor Asian Americans, and we are not going to let you use the Asian American community to oppress other people and other communities of color. And I think that's the hill that we all need to die on.
Thank you so much, everyone. Please check out aafederation.org and on Twitter, and Paula Yoo on Twitter at Paula Yoo. You will learn so much from following the work of these two amazing ladies and the work that they have that they're doing. We're so grateful. Rajan says, as I've said elsewhere, Asian Americans being seen as the perpetual foreigners will not go away in my lifetime. I turn 58 in a few days. Happy birthday in advance, Rajan. we all have work to do. There was also a comment earlier about the tension between, back in India, there is a lot of tension at the border between India and China. And therefore, there's a lot of angry things said on social media that spills over in the diaspora also. And we can't, as an Asian American community, be separated by whatever happens geopolitically. You may know that in India, apps like WeChat and others have been banned because more than 60 Chinese apps have been banned in India. And so there's a lot of tension around that. And we need to make sure that that doesn't spill over here in any way. Larry says, sadly, giving him too much power and influence, that's the former guy, or President Trump, I think he enabled these deep-seated biases to surface and manifest in outward aggression, not microaggressions. And Jonathan says, fantastic and important show. Thank you. And thank you very much, Jonathan. So with that, we will say goodnight. I'm so grateful to these two folks who I know had a full day of work at their computer and still made the time to be with us tonight, sharing these stories. Everyone, please check out the work of the Federation, and please check out Paula's new book. And Paula, tell us about where those buttons and shirts can be found.
Yes. This again is
wash your hands and don't be racist from inclusive randomness.
Yes, and she's on Instagram, and you can find, I think it's inclusiverandomness.com. And then this shirt, and I also have my Black Heroes Matter shirt as well, and they have all different communities. They are Black Heroes Matter, and you can find them, I think it's BH Matter on Instagram and also on Twitter, and they have a website. I think it's a .org website. But yeah, and thank you, everybody. I loved all the comments and questions, and it is truly an honor to talk to the both of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And folks, we'll see you again. And a reminder that one of the shows we do is every Sunday, we read the Sunday New York Times out loud at 8:30 a.m. Eastern on all of these channels and talk to fabulous guests. So please join us for that, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, live or recorded. And this show will run as soon as we're off the air. Please tag a friend, someone who would benefit from this conversation. They can watch as soon as it's over on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you.